In today's video, I'm gonna be brewing up a hazy IPA, but I'm gonna be using methods that are very, very abbreviated. I'm gonna be making this hazy IPA Brulosophy style, short and shoddy. I have been homebrewing now for almost 10 years, and throughout most of that time, I've actually followed Brulosophy quite closely. And if you follow Brulosophy at all, you're probably familiar with the short and shoddy method, which is a really interesting method of brewing in which you're trying to cut as many corners as reasonably possible to save time during the brewing process and to not care about it too much, and seeing how good of a beer can you get out of that process. This is a whole series on Brulosophy where they have done a bunch of different beer styles. They've done usually 30 minutes or less in both the mash and the boil, getting a brew day done in less than 2 hours in some cases. They cut so many corners sometimes that makes traditionalist brewers like myself just go like, what are you doing? But ultimately, most of the time, the beer that results is actually very good from a panel of not only standard beer drinkers, but also BJCP certified judges as well. There's a growing pile of evidence out there now from the Short and Shoddy series that shows that, yeah, maybe you can get away with a 30-minute mash, a 30-minute boil, and many more shortcuts during the brewing process, and it may not have a really big impact on the beer, especially to the average person that's drinking your beer. For the longest time, I've wanted to try this out for myself. I've done a handful of short mashes and short boils in the past, and they've all been reasonably successful, but I haven't done all of these things together. I've never brewed truly short and shoddy, and I want to try it because I really do have a problem right now with free time to brew. And I thought, what the hell, why don't I just try a 2-hour short and shoddy brew day? So that's what we're gonna do today. So just how short and shoddy is this going to be? Well, number one, I'm not gonna be using my reverse osmosis system. I'm gonna decouple the filters from the RO membrane. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run my regular water supply through the triple filter system. This is going to scrub out the chlorine still, which is very important, but it's not gonna run through the RO membrane. Secondly, I'm gonna just take an educated guess on the water chemistry. I'm not gonna measure anything out on a scale. I'm just gonna eyeball it. Then we're gonna do a 30-minute mash. And I'm not even gonna bother with measuring pH on that one. I'm just gonna kind of trust that things work out the way they will. I'm gonna do no mash out. There's gonna be no sparge, and I'm gonna go straight into a short 30-minute boil, which that kind of works for a hazy IPA, and I probably would have done that anyway. But on top of that, we're also gonna no chill this thing. I'm gonna do a whirlpool step with some hops, and then we're just gonna send it directly into the fermenter. Because I'm using a steel fermenter, I don't really have to worry about it melting or anything, so it's just gonna go straight in there. It'll chill overnight probably, and then I'm gonna just pitch 1 packet of yeast directly out of the package into it and just kind of see how it goes. This is a very fast and loose brew day and not something that I normally do. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. I think it's gonna help me relax and, you know, just not worry too much about how things are gonna turn out. So we'll see how it goes. Because of the short mash and the short boil, there is always gonna be an anticipated efficiency hit. Normally I get about a 75% brewhouse efficiency when I do everything very deliberately through. But in this case, I think we're gonna probably look at more like 60 to 65% efficiency. We'll see how that looks after the brew day is finished. To add to the absolute chaos of this brew day, I am not only going to be doing this short and shoddy style, but I'm also just going to be kind of haphazardly throwing a recipe together from a bunch of leftover IPA hops I have in my freezer. There's a bunch of like New Zealand hops and stuff that I haven't really pieced together. They're left over from old brew days, and you know what? It's time they went into a beer. So we're gonna do a freezer cleaner IPA, short and shoddy style. Like, this thing is gonna be so janky, I love it. Before we jump into the recipe, I do wanna give a quick shout out to a couple organizations for helping make this video possible. Firstly, Northern Brewer, who provided most of the ingredients for this batch of beer. It is an amalgamation of various leftover ingredients, so they didn't cover everything, but still do check them out for your recipe needs. And secondly, Clawhammer Supply, who make the system that I'll be brewing this beer on today. It's their 10-gallon, 240-volt system. Keeping in mind the efficiency hit, there's quite a bit of grain in this, about 16 pounds, but we're only expecting probably about a 7% alcohol beer. So for starters, for the base malt, I'm gonna be using Brees Pilsner malt, standard Pilsner malt, no frills here, 10 pounds of that. And next we're gonna add to this some stuff that's gonna make the hazy IPA get a little bit more body, get that protein level in there, and the haze formation. So we're starting out with 2 pounds of spelt malt from Best Malts to do that. Spelt is like an ancient form of wheat. It's a really cool grain. and it has really, really high protein content that really helps a lot in terms of both generating haze and, you know, providing something for the polyphenols and dry hops to grab onto, which is what creates that haze. It's what helps create the suspension in the beer of the yeast and the hop particles, but also it's going to help significantly to smooth out the body, to puff it up a little bit and give really, really good head retention. Normally in these beers I'd be using about the same amount with wheat malt, but I had some leftover spelt malt I wanted to play around with. We're also going to add on top of that 2 pounds of flaked oats from Brew. These are going to help provide a little bit more of that body, a little bit of sweetness and smoothness to the beer. It's, I would argue, a pretty critical ingredient in a hazy IPA. On top of this, I'm adding 2 pounds of 6-row pale malt from RAR. No other reason for that other than it being left over. So again, cleaning out some of the extra ingredients I have here. I just needed 2 more pounds of base malt. Don't worry about it. And then lastly, 4 ounces of honey malt, which again, another leftover color malt there. Honey malt is going to give the beer a little bit of extra maltiness, roundness, and a little bit of sweetness, but also color as well. All of these grains prior to the honey malt are very pale grains, and I do like a little bit of color in my hazy IPAs now. I found kind of shifting away from how I used to do things, but a nice medium orange color is actually pretty nice. So I'm going to add in a little bit of honey malt in there to make that happen. For the hops in this beer, I have a whole smattering of random IPA hops in here, most of which are Southern Hemisphere, kind of New Zealand style hops. First and foremost, I'm going to be using 1 ounce each of Citra and Galaxy, and that's going to go in at the 10-minute mark. So typically I like to do a little bit of a bitterness addition on hazy IPAs. I do prefer having some bitterness in there, and a 10-minute boil is enough to get a good base of bitterness in there. That's going to add 21 and 26 IBUs respectively, which is a hefty amount of bitterness, but keep in mind this is also going to be about a 7% beer with a good amount of maltiness behind it. So I do believe that's going to be relatively balanced for an IPA. Following that up with a hop stand. We're going to do a hop stand with 2 ounces of Motueka and 1 ounce of Nectaron. Both of these hops should work together pretty well to provide some nice citrus flavors as well as a little bit of stone fruit. So, you know, the Citra and the Galaxy are going to provide nice tropical fruits, fleshy fruits, and a little bit of citrus as well. But the Motueka really pushes like lime, lemon lime kind of things, and Nectaron is just a straight up like peach bomb. I love it. Now, since I'm not doing a chill on this one, the hop stand's actually just going to be a natural chill. It's probably going to start at about 200 degrees. That may also add some more IBUs. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to go, but most times I found the hop stand doesn't really contribute that much bitterness, so I'm not too concerned about it. They'll sit in the hop stand for about 15 minutes, and then I'll transfer over into the fermenter. Then we're gonna go and dry hop this beer with the remaining hops that I have. And it's a light dry hop for a hazy IPA. It's not as much as I think I really would have otherwise done, but I don't have any other leftover hops. So this is kind of what we're stuck with. This will be a double dry hopped beer because I think that does produce the best, most complex flavors from the dry hopping. So we're gonna start with 1 ounce of Waimea, which is going to be a day 3 dry hop. So in the middle of fermentation, we'll get a nice biotransformation effect from this one. And then at the end of fermentation, we'll do an oxygen-free dry hop of 1 ounce of Brew 1 and 1 ounce of Rakau. Both of these are extremely like pineapple and tropical fruit forward hops that I think are going to lend a really nice character to round everything out at the end of the day. We'll let those dry hops sit in there for about 3 days, and then we'll go ahead and keg that beer. For the water profile in this beer, because I can't measure out the individual amounts of each mineral, I'm not going to be able to tell you the exact water profile in parts per million that you're going to get, but I can give you a baseline. And generally for a hazy IPA, what you want is a water profile that's got a good amount of minerals in it, but more importantly than anything else is a high chloride to sulfate ratio, at least 2 to 1. It makes the beer juicier, it cuts down the bitterness levels, and it helps it round out and fluff out a little bit as well. Now I'm starting out with Boston Municipal Water, which all things considered is actually pretty decent brewing water as long as you get the chlorine out. But this is based off of a water profile from a few months ago, and of course that's the water profile that's measured at the exit of the water treatment plant. It's not measured as it comes into your house and your supply lines. It's gone through miles and miles and miles of old piping that probably picked up a lot more minerals and a lot of different items in the process. Nonetheless, the Boston water profile that I'm looking at right now is 4 parts per million of calcium, 1 part per million of magnesium, 32 parts per million of sodium, 25 parts per million of chloride, and 6 parts per million of sulfate, and I couldn't get any alkalinity or hardness data. I'm gonna be adding what I think is about 5 grams of calcium chloride to the whole thing, and a little bit of Epsom, a little bit of gypsum, just to get that calcium level also bumped up as well, which will help with pH in the mash. Not that I'm gonna measure that. For the yeast in this beer, I'm gonna be using the classic Hazy IPA strain. This is London Ale 3, the Boddington strain. In this case, it's gonna be in the form of Imperial A38 juice. This is a great strain. I'm choosing Imperial because I know I can just pitch it right out of the packet. I'm gonna have enough cells in that fermentation to be successful. And last but certainly not least, the mash on this beer. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's a 30-minute mash, and I'm gonna be doing this at 152 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, that's a good middle of the road ballpark temperature that's gonna get me a decent balance in the beer, and I think we'll get all the conversion that I need done in less than half an hour. Very excited to get this thing started. I'm curious to find out just how quickly I'm gonna be able to pull this off, so I am gonna time the whole brew day, and I'll keep you guys updated as it goes. Let's go ahead and get started. I started out by bypassing the RO membrane in my RO filter system. So basically, water was just flowing in from the supply and going through the 3 filters and then going into the kettle. I have a TDS meter, or a total dissolved solids meter, on this system, and it showed me about 68 parts per million of overall solids going into the kettle, which was not bad, all things considered. I started filling the kettle at 12:52 p.m. and stopped once I reached about 8 gallons of water. Which was less than 15 minutes later, which is in stark contrast to the 2.5 hours that it takes me normally to collect 8 gallons of reverse osmosis water. Once the heating element was fully submerged, I started heating up to the target mash temperature of 152 Fahrenheit as it was continuing to fill the kettle. While it was filling and heating, I took a very, very rough guess on water salts, added those into the strike water, and also milled out all of my grain with the exception of the flaked oats. Once the strike water had reached the target mash-in temperature of 152 Fahrenheit, I mashed in with the entire grain bill and added a few scoops of ascorbic acid, about 3 to 5 grams. This just helps to cut down on reactive oxygen species in the mash, which helps to avoid oxidation later on in the process. All in all, I was mashed in at 1:24 p.m. I conducted a 30-minute mash, skipping the pH step, skipping the mash out step, and just directly pulling the grain basket out of the mash. Half an hour later, I allowed that to drain for about 15 minutes, while I also heated the wort up to a full boil. I reached the boil at 2:17 p.m., and at this point I started the 30-minute boil. 20 minutes in, at the 10-minute mark, I added in 1 ounce of Citra and 1 ounce of Galaxy, as well as some yeast nutrient and a Whirlflock tablet. Yes, this is a hazy IPA, and yes, I added a Whirlflock tablet. It's okay. It just helps coagulate a lot of the junk and trub and leave you with a lot more beer at the end of the process. 10 minutes after this, I turned off the heat, ending the boil, and started to recirculate the wort through the overhanging whirlpool arm. This got everything down to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and by this time it was 2:49 p.m. So at this time I added in my whirlpool hops, which were 2 ounces of Motueka and 1 ounce of Nectaron, and allowed them to sit in the whirlpool and recirculate for about 15 minutes, while I also continued to keep the heat off. Over the course of the whirlpool, the temperature dropped from 200 degrees to about 180. At this time, I ended the whirlpool by simply starting the pump up and pushing the hot wort directly into my stainless steel fermenter. I did not use the glycol jacket to try and cool it down to pitching temperature because that does put a ton of stress on the chiller, and I did not want to break my glycol chiller. The wort was fully transferred into the fermenter by 3:15 p.m., which made for a total brew day time of 2 hours and 23 minutes. If you don't count the time it took to fill the kettle with water and heat it up to the mash temperature, that's only 1 hour and 51 minutes. When compared to my standard process, the time that elapses between these same points in the process is usually about 4 to 4.5 hours, so this was actually a pretty great time savings, all things considered. I let everything cool down overnight and then pitched my yeast the following day once I had reached a good pitching temperature of about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I took an OG measurement, confirming that I got about a 10% efficiency loss with an OG of 1066, which was fantastic. So at this point, I left everything to continue fermentation. Really quickly, let's talk about the fermentation for this beer. In my opinion, the short and shoddy method of brewing is meant to save you a lot of time on the brew day itself. But the fermentation is still gonna take as much time as it needs. And I'm not really planning on doing anything short and shoddy about the fermentation. There's an old adage that goes, brewers make wort and yeast makes beer. Basically, you can get away with having subpar wort going into the fermenter, but you can get a great fermentation out of it and you can make fantastic beer that way. On the flip side though, you can have amazing wort go into the fermenter, but if you don't have a good fermentation, that beer is not going to be good at all. So while we took a lot of shortcuts on the brew day side of things, I'm not gonna take a lot of shortcuts on the fermentation. I'm gonna treat this one carefully. As it is a hazy IPA, we want to avoid oxidation at all costs. Keeping that beer sealed to the outside and preferably under a little bit of CO2 pressure is always gonna be beneficial. When I'm dry hopping this beer, the first dry hop is going to be in the middle of fermentation, so there's no oxygen risk there. But the second dry hop is after fermentation's complete, so there's an oxygen risk at that point. So we're gonna have to use an oxygen-free dry hop for that step. Also keep in mind, you're gonna wanna do a closed transfer as you transfer this beer from one container to the next. It's very important to keep that oxygen out of the beer at all times, especially after fermentation is complete. But basically, I'm gonna pitch in one packet of Imperial A38 juice. This is a relatively new packet of yeast, so it should ferment very, very nicely without a starter. I'm not too concerned about underpitching this particular beer, although it is a slight underpitch technically, but I'm also adding yeast nutrient into the wort, so I think it's gonna even out pretty well. We'll see. Nonetheless though, it is gonna ferment at 68 degrees, which is the optimal fermentation temperature for this strain. It's gonna help coax out a little bit of those esters that this strain is known for, and it's going to help really blend very nicely with those hops. We're gonna ferment for probably about 10 to 14 days, and I'm gonna do 2 dry hops. The first is going to be that 1 ounce of Waimea at day 3, and I can just open up the fermenter and toss that in. The second one is going to be the oxygen-free dry hop with 1 ounce of Brew 1 and 1 ounce of Rakau going in probably day 10, maybe day 14, whenever that airlock activity stops, when the fermentation's mostly complete. There are 2 other things that I like to do with fermentation on the regular. The first is going to be adding some ALDC enzyme at yeast pitch. In a nutshell, what this does is it cuts down on the production of diacetyl, which is a nasty, slick, buttery feeling and taste in the beer, and that can result from dry hopping if you're not careful as well. It's just cheap insurance to help prevent that from happening. Secondly, I will also dry hop cold typically for that second dry hop. What this does is it prevents hop burn, essentially, from like suspended pieces of vegetal matter and hop debris in the beer when the beer is young. As the colder temperature kind of forces things to drop down into the bottom of the fermenter a little bit faster, what it does is it prevents those hops from being out and about in the beer as much. You still get great extraction from the oils, and in fact, you get a slightly different and, in my opinion, a little bit more pleasant character out of it as well. But you're not gonna get that hop burn from it, and it's a beneficial thing, in my opinion, to do. Really quickly, let's talk about the alternate yeast choices for a hazy IPA. There are a million out there. It's such a popular beer style that these yeasts have really surged in popularity, but there's also many different subcategories within them. I'm gonna be using what is objectively the standard for these beers, which is the English London Ale 3 strain. I'm using Imperial A38 juice, but this is also available as Yeast 1318 and WLP 066 London Fog. I would absolutely recommend Lallemand Verdant IPA, and you can definitely get away with Fermentus SO4. Another fun option is the Alchemist strains. So the beers that made hazy IPA popular, like Heady Topper, these are fermented with the Conan strain from the Alchemist Brewery. This is available as Imperial Barbarian or Vermont Ale or Burlington Ale. All of these are fantastic options. It's not as hazy, but it is just as juicy. And I've had great results with them in the past. And last but certainly not least, this is a fantastic candidate for a Kveik fermentation. Specifically, I'd recommend Voss Kveik, Hornindal Kveik, or Espy Kveik. Voss will be very orange forward. Hornindal is very tropical fruit and like pineapple-y, and Espy is this like wild kind of melony, mango-y thing that's really, really good. And all 3 of these things work together fantastically with tropical hops. They ferment out very fast at high temperatures and quite reliably as well. Not only that, but they also have a little bit of a pH drop naturally in the fermentation, which counteracts the pH rise you get from dry hopping. I'm not gonna dive deep into that right now. That's a subject for a whole other video. But the bottom line is it's a fantastic candidate for a nice hot Kveik fermentation. And, you know, in many ways, it can be done without temperature control if you do it that way, which even more contributes to the whole short and shoddy style of doing it. I'm very, very excited to see what happens with this. I've never taken so many shortcuts in brewing ever, so should be fun. Either way, I'll catch you guys when it's all ready. Until then, cheers. Fermentation for this batch of beer went about as well as expected. Fermentation took exactly what I expected, about 10 to 14 days. It was not as quick as some of my other fermentations, just simply because I did not pitch as much yeast as my other fermentations. According to the plan, I dry hopped first with 1 ounce of Waimea on day 3, allowed that to sit in the beer as it was fermenting until I saw a reasonably stable final gravity around day 12. At this point, I started to lower the temperature down to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and then I added in my second dry hop, the 1 ounce of Brew 1 and the 1 ounce of Rakau. Then I let the hops sit in the beer for another 3 days at 55 degrees before finally conducting a close transfer into the keg and getting the beer carbonated up. At this point, I also measured my final gravity one more time and found it to be 1011. The beer is called Lazy Haze, and it comes in at 7.2% ABV and 75 IBUs. For the appearance of the beer, it pours a beautiful light golden color. This is really exactly what I was going for in terms of color. Not quite orange, but definitely not quite Pilsner pale. It's a nice level of haze too. It's not too opaque or thick. It's definitely not milky. It's just got this nice level of haze that allows a little bit of light to get into it and illuminate the beer. While it wasn't pouring particularly lively when I took this shot, the head that does build up is quite nice and stable. Has very good dense construction and of course leaves a good layer on the surface as well. All right, so now let's go in for aroma. Right off the bat, I'm met with a really nice pungent aroma. The most prominent components of this aroma are like a passion fruit, and a little bit of a mango, and then there's definitely like an underlaying hoppy, piney kind of element to it, and yeah, a little bit of a dankness there. Smells pretty good overall. It smells juicy and tropical. So now let's go in for mouthfeel. Smooth as can be. Just a nice, soft, fluffy, like exactly what I would expect out of a hazy IPA. Very soft and light, no edges, no hardness. It's also a medium-low carbonation on this as well, which is nice. It kind of helps accentuate that smoothness. Nice full body to it. Not necessarily heavy, but just, you know, full, fluffy, soft feeling. It doesn't have the like slick over fullness that some IPAs have. It doesn't have that like oily character too, which is nice because sometimes that can be a thing. And also, I'm happy to report there's no astringent hop burn character. That's partly because I dry hopped cold and also partly because this is now sat in the keg for a few days. So it's had time for those hop particulates to drop to the bottom of the keg. All right, so now the part that we've all been waiting for, the flavor. That's pretty good. Like, this is a nice balance between bitterness and juiciness. I have, on paper, 75 IBUs in this beer, which is like ridiculous for a hazy IPA, but I don't taste any of that bitterness. That's all calculated IBUs, but the perceived levels of bitterness on this are significantly less. The Sierra Nevada Pale Ale has more perceptible bitterness than this does. It's enough to give you that nice kind of bright citrus character that's accentuated by a little bit of bitterness, and I enjoy that flavor. There's a nice combination of flavors in this, but they're a little bit muddy, and the reason is, well, this wasn't really a seriously thought out hop bill. I mean, it was an amalgamation of random hops that I had in my freezer. I wasn't really expecting them to play together that well. They do still play together pretty well overall. It's a nice kind of muddled combination of grapefruit and citrus. You get a little bit of passion fruit and mango. Actually, no, you get a lot of passion fruit and mango. There's a lot of like fleshy, full tropical fruits in there. There's a subtle pine character to it, with a little bit of kind of a dankness. I mean, like I'm basically listing off every hop descriptor ever, but it all kind of works out pretty well. The strongest stuff is grapefruit and the camp of like generic tropical fruit. The juiciness comes through really well. I mean, obviously it's super drinkable. I've barely had this thing in my hand for like 10 minutes and it's almost gone. You know, if I had obviously weeded out the hops and thought very, very carefully about exactly which combinations I wanted to put in here, it would be a little bit more structured in terms of how I want to group these flavors together. But for a random combination of freezer hops, this is pretty good. There's like a little bit of a peach in there too. I think that's probably coming from Nectaron. And like the more you let this thing sit around, the more flavor comes out of it. There's some like Starburst, kind of like pink Starburst character. That's nice. Really nice, actually. It's just got this finishing note of a little bit of a chewy, white bready malt character. Nothing more. It's nice. It's a good balance. It's a good base recipe. I would maybe improve this by throwing a couple different hops in there, but all in all, it's pretty freaking good. And then here's the thing. How good is it for short and shoddy? Blows my mind. I was shocked. I did not expect this beer to turn out as good as it is. I did not expect it to turn out as finished as it did, as polished as it did. Like, first of all, I'm pretty shocked actually that there's no water profile derived issues here. I thought at least there might be a little bit of chlorophenol in there because I wasn't 100% certain I could scrub that all out, but it worked out pretty well. One thing I was really expecting too was that with a 30-minute mash, I thought we'd have leftover extra starches in there, which could lead to it feeling really full and slick and just kind of like chunky, and that's not the case at all. This is actually feeling right on point for a hazy. And then lastly, I thought a 30-minute boil with no chill on top of that, maybe we get some extra bitterness, especially with a no chill in the whirlpool, but no, it's like the bitterness on this is what I was expecting. So all in all, I'm super surprised at how well this particular beer turned out for being a 2-hour brew day. It blows my mind. And you know, maybe that's one of the more forgiving styles for that type of brewing because it's got so much flavor in it. I would still argue I expected a hell of a lot more in terms of flaws, and I can't find any flaws in this beer related to process, which is pretty cool. I might end up doing a few more of these short and shoddy style brew days because I can't tell you how awesome it was to be done within 2 hours. I can literally do an entire brew day during my kid's nap if I wanted to. Like, that's a game changer. And one of the other things that I really enjoyed was just not caring too much about the brew day, not caring too much about the results, not caring too much about this step, that step, getting this thing done on time. Like, it just didn't invoke as much stress. It was just chill. It was a good time. Very, very fun brew day. And yeah, I could see myself doing more of this in the future. Let me know if you have done this style of brewing in the past and how your results have looked and what other styles I should check out maybe with this particular method of brewing. If you enjoyed this video, you found it useful, you learned something, anything at all positive, please go ahead and hit that like button because it does make a difference for my channel and making it more visible to the rest of YouTube. As always, if you want to support the channel, consider picking up a t-shirt like this design, and many others are available in my new merchandise store, which is linked down in the description box below. I'm using Fourth Wall now. Teespring has become significantly less reliable as a dropship supplier lately, so moved over to Fourth Wall. They've got some extra products too. I'm continuously expanding this merchandise store when I get free time. We've got shirts, we've got glassware, we've got a whole host of other items out there. I also have a Patreon, and my patrons are the reason why I'm able to keep continuing this channel along. Seriously, you guys are actually the #1 supporter financially for the channel. It makes a bigger difference than you might anticipate. Not only are you covering production costs, you're also covering business expenses and a whole host of other things. So I really appreciate the support there. You guys have done a lot more for the channel than you might think. If Patreon is not your thing though, I also have channel memberships. There's also the super thanks button. Both of those are quick and easy ways to help support the channel. It goes right back into it just like everything else. There's also an Amazon store in the description box down below where you can find a lot of the brewing stuff that I use on the regular if it's available on Amazon. It's also my channel production equipment on that site as well. Check it out if you're curious. And if you want to follow me on more than just YouTube, I'm also available on Instagram and Facebook as the Apartment Brewer, so check those links out for some more frequent and continued content. You get to see what's coming to the channel in the very near future. And last but certainly not least, if you are still here, thank you very much for watching all the way to the end of the video. These things can get kind of long, but they're still a lot of fun to make, and it means a lot to me if you're watching at this point because that means you got something out of it, and that's what I want. So I want for you guys to learn and be entertained. And so, this one goes out to you, and I will catch you all in the next one. And until then, cheers.